and that we may be having some, oh, there it is. No technical difficulties anymore. You might, Tony was going to preach today. I think I told you guys that last week, but he really went to great lengths to get out of it. Keep in your prayers. He's doing well, but you know how hospitals are. It's not a place for rest. Maybe recuperation, but not for rest. So he is resting. But he's back home. So last week, we had some light discussion about responsibility and accountability. And so I thought today we'd follow it up with some light discussion about pain and suffering. Woohoo! Yeah. Change. Yep, a lot of moving our cheese today. It's a book reference if you don't know it. So how many, I just want to ask first though, from last week, not everybody was here, but some of you were, and some of you may have heard it later on the live stream. How many of you, like the Lord spoke to you about something that you needed to be paying attention to more closely, and you made a plan, and you told somebody about it? 1, 2. All right. Somewhere. Okay. Maybe I should have gone easy on myself and not on you guys and not added all 3 of those all in there at once. Maybe some of you only made a plan but didn't feel like the Lord was calling you to tell somebody about it. That's cool. But if the Lord is speaking to you and you haven't done any of those things, like made a plan, and you think the Lord's telling you to talk to somebody about it, to go back and do that. Let's not leave that aside. When the Lord tells us to do something, we need to act on it. Okay. All right. So last week we talked about one of the first of several exhortation passages that are in the book of Hebrews. We're going through the book of Hebrews for those that are they're first-time visitors. We're in chapter 2. And at the beginning of chapter 2, there is the first of several exhortation passages that are kind of put into this longer theological thing. But they're not shoehorned in like afterthoughts. They're actually the main point of Hebrews. The preacher of Hebrews, as scholars call him, because we don't know who it was, and because Hebrews is written like a sermon, so they call him the preacher. He's not trying to educate his listeners on theology. That's not his objective. His objective is to use his theology about Jesus to encourage them, to exhort them, to help them in a time of distress. And in fact, some scholars, for that reason, like to call him the pastor of Hebrews, not the preacher of the book of Hebrews. But that's really what he's after. He's not just out here to try to transmit a whole bunch of knowledge about who Jesus was and is. And so today we're gonna keep talking back to this kind of this flow of logic that he has on some things that he's saying about Jesus. And the one we're talking about today is like a transition in between a couple of ideas. So the Son is superior to being superior to the angels is the first thing he talks about back at the end of chapter 1, right? He quotes this string of verses, something like 6 or 7, I think 7 in the end, sections, mostly from the Psalms, and where he's just saying, hey, here's all the stuff that the Bible says, their Bible, right, the Old Testament known to us, says about the Son and how he is superior to the angels. And later on, he's going to go on and talk about, like after this, he's going to go on and talk about how the Son being amongst us, right, suffered for us. And in between those two sections is what we're going to talk about today, where he starts to talk about how the Son, temporarily, for a certain amount of time, it was made positionally lower than the angels, not that he was actually subject to angels, but he became a human like we are. So that's what he's talking about. It's kind of transition between these ideas. And so to kind of help with that, I want to just read the end, before the exhortation piece that we kind of did last week. Right before that, I want to read the end of that and then skip over the exhortation piece and straight into what we're going to talk about today. And that'll, I think, help connect the dots, because he's assuming you're remembering that when you're hearing this. And so it'll help connect the dots for the flow of logic for us. You'll see how it works in a second. So, Hebrews, the end of chapter 1. He's talking about how the Son is superior to the angels. But to which of the angels has he ever said, "Sit down at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet"? Quote from Psalm 110. Are they not all spirits engaged in special service, sent on assignment for the sake of those who are going to inherit salvation? Chapter 2. For he did not subject to angels the world to come, about which we are speaking, but someone testified somewhere saying, "What is man that you remember him, or the Son of Man that you care for him? You made him for a short time lower than the angels. You crowned him with glory and honor. You subjected all things under his feet. For in subjecting all things he left nothing that was not subject to him. But now we do not see all things subjected to him. But we see Jesus, for a short time made lower than the angels, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he might taste death on behalf of everyone." So let's step through this a little slower. First, he starts talking about the angels being the angels being subject, not being rulers of the world in the age to come, right? Only Jesus. For he did not subject to angels the world to come, about which we are speaking. So it's maybe a weird thing to say. It might sound like a little weird thing to say out of left field. What you got to realize is that ancient Jews, and I see, I don't mean just them, but in their context, them, really saw how the Old Testament was talking about, like, the world was maybe like split up or apportioned or whatever under angels, different nations, right? It starts in Deuteronomy 32:8. Deuteronomy 32:8 says, "When the Most High apportioned the nations at his dividing up of the sons of humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God." Sons of God is a phrase that means like spiritual beings, like angels or demons, depending on their inclination. And we see this like in Daniel too, right? Daniel has this dream. If you're not familiar with it, I won't go into the whole thing, but he has this dream, and then he's praying about it, and he's fasting, and then this angel shows up to tell him the meaning of the dream. It's Michael, and he says, "Yeah, I actually left 3 weeks ago when you started fasting, but it took me 3 weeks to get here because the prince of Persia was opposing me." And he's referring to, Daniel's in Persia, he's referring to an angelic being of some kind, a demonic being probably, right? And so, anyway, I'm not going to go into, this isn't a sermon about all that stuff, but just understand that the ancient Hebrews and the Jewish people around Jesus' time, they're all like, "Oh yeah, we're tracking," you know. The world was like divvied up this way, but in the age to come, that's not going to be how it is. It's all going to be under Jesus, right? So that's what he's saying here, the preacher of Hebrews, that the world to come, in this new era, you know, when everything's consummated, when the kingdom of God comes on down to the earth, that it's going to be under the Son. And he quotes from Psalm 8, verse 4 through 6. What is man that you remember him, or the son of man that you care for him? You made him for a short time lower than the angels. You crown him with glory and honor. You subjected all things under his feet. And we said in a previous sermon, I think I've mentioned it. I know the video we showed way at the beginning that Scott showed during the introduction mentioned it. It really pays off when you're reading Hebrews and he quotes from the Old Testament, which is like all the time. So it's a lot of work. But it pays off to go back and just look that up and read like the context around this quote. Psalm 8 that he's quoting from here is like a poetic reflection on Genesis 1:28. Genesis 1:28 is where God says, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, and the animals on the land." And then in Psalm 8, the poet is kind of like thinking about that verse, and he's like, man, what is it, Lord? Like, your creation is so majestic. He says, when I consider the works of your hands, the moon and the stars, like, how is it that you put us in charge of all these animals, like, and all these fish and all these birds in this world? Like, why did you, like, we're nothing. When I look at this world, it's so majestic. Like, why is it that we're the ones in charge? But that is the way it is, and that's part of your majestic plan. And I'm not going to read it, but yeah, go back and read Psalm 8. That's what he's talking about. And then here the preacher of Hebrews says, yeah, not only that, but he sees Jesus in this psalm, and he says, yeah, he was made for a short time lower than the angels, but now he's been crowned with glory and honor. But unlike us, he's been risen, he's been exalted to a position where everything is under his feet. Like, not just the animals and the birds and you know, the plants or whatever, but everything, all powers, principalities, all, you know, everything past, present, future, above the earth, on the earth, under the earth, everything is subjected to him. And so he makes this he makes this connection there, and he's telling his audience, yeah, just like in Psalm 8, but Jesus was the truest human in that sense. He's fully God and fully human, but he's the first, right? And so he talks about that, but then, you know, there's this like tension, and it's in that he's talking about. Remember, at the end of Hebrews 1, I read where he's quoting again from Psalm 110, where it says, "Sit down at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool from your feet." But in the end of verse 6 of Psalm 8 that he's quoting says, everything's been subjected to his feet. And so he starts talking a little bit at the end of verse 8 in Hebrews about this tension. You know, we call it the kingdom that's here and not yet, right? The reign of Christ has been inaugurated at his death and resurrection, but it's still there's this in-between time between Jesus' exaltation and then the final consummation of this whole thing. And in this in-between time, the church is here. We're telling the world about Jesus, and we're also subject to the ills of this world, pain and suffering sometimes. And so he points that out at the end. He says, now, in subjecting all things, he left nothing that was not subject to him, but we don't see all things yet subjected to him. So he's like, yeah, it's all there, but it's also still happening. It's like already done, but it's also still in process. Not at all the only time that this sort of thing is talked about by the New Testament authors. They all talk about it. 1 Peter chapters 1 and 2 especially, he just flops back and forth. Every other verse, first he's talking about things that already happened, and then he's talking about it like they're still happening. just trying to make that point. And so is the author of Hebrews here. He's saying, yeah, I've been talking about how Jesus is over everything, but we also know that things are still coming under him, and we're in this kind of in-between time. Does this make sense? Okay. And then he goes on. I told you this was a transition piece in between two ideas, and he goes on to give us like a little bit of a taste, a little bit of some foreshadowing, some hints about what's going on, what he's about to talk about. And so I've put these verses up there again, this time kind of highlighting a couple things in some colors so we can see them. So he quotes from Psalm 8, and I put in green and in blue. He repeats those phrases. He quotes Psalm 8, and then he starts talking about Psalm 8. And as he's talking about it, he repeats those phrases about being made for a short time lower than the angels and being crowned with glory and honor. But in between that, he says it's because of the suffering of death that Jesus came down. He's talking about the incarnation. He came down, was born as a man, born as a baby, grew up just like all of us, pooped his diapers, banged his knees, scraped his, whatever, right? Learned how to talk, learned how to walk. For a short time, he was made positionally lower than the angels. And then he was exalted, but in between that, what happened was that he suffered and he died. And elsewhere in the Bible and elsewhere in Hebrews, those are connected. This suffering is what leads to his exaltation. And this is what he's going to go on to talk about, how the author of Hebrews is, how Jesus represents us, how he lived the life we're living. He died just like we're all going to die. He suffered loss just like we suffer loss. He was hungry, he was thirsty. He knew what it was like for people close to him to pass away. He knew what it was like to be hurt, just like us. He knew what it was like to be happy, to eat a good meal. And he's kind of saying, with that word see, he's saying, we got to look at Jesus. When this is our life too. The work right now, we're going to be one day exalted with Jesus. But right now we're in this suffering period. And that Jesus is an example that we can look at. And someone we can say, oh, he endured. And he persevered. And he trusted God. And this will become more clear as we keep going in Hebrews. Because, again, this is just a transition piece of Hebrews where he's kind of starting to talk about this and give us a little taste of what he's going to really start spelling out in a lot more detail later. But about how looking to Jesus is something that we need to be doing when we're walking through this life, looking at his example, looking at how he endured, how he persevered. You guys still with me? Oh, and I'll say that's tied to Psalm 8. Remember Psalm 8 is about how the humans, the humans that are made out of dirt, the dirt bags, are bags of dirt. I don't know. They're it's not derogatory, but we are made out of the stuff of earth, and we're in that position. But he's given us a higher responsibility. That's what the psalmist is reflecting on. Like there's this huge creation. When I look at everything you've made, God, like how is it that you chose us to exalt us and say you guys get to be the ones ruling this place? But Jesus had a return to that true, or not a return. He showed us what our return to being truly human looks like. And so it's subtle, but it's intentional. The author of Hebrews here is making this connection, just like Jesus suffered and then was exalted. And hey, here's this psalm that talks about us, and Jesus is in this psalm, but this psalm is also about people. Let's put two and two together is kind of what he's saying. So, it's not a, and the last two sermons, this one and the one before that I've preached on this, the text is not complicated. Maybe some of what he's doing is a little subtle, but there's no like weird words that you got to understand. What does he mean here? But man, do they pack a punch. And what I think the Lord has for us out of this text today in particular has to do, like I said at the beginning, with the problem of pain. I put this quote from Larry Crabb, his book Finding God. He says, "We've become committed to relieving the pain behind our problems rather than using our pain to wrestle more passionately with the character and purposes of God. Feeling better has become more important than finding God. And worse, we assume that just because you found God, you immediately feel better. Everything goes away, all the pain goes away." I really think he's onto something. In our Western cultures in particular, Europe, the Americas, that whole Western culture. Maybe other cultures I think have a different viewpoint, but the planet's moving in this direction of thinking about, okay, I just gotta put aside my pain somehow. If I'm in pain, I need to get out of the pain. If I'm having a bad time, I need to figure out how to get out of it. And the focus becomes, how can I make this end? How can I make it stop? Over and above, God, where are you right now in this situation? And it's not wrong to not want to be in pain, right? It's not wrong to want this to end. But there is, Mike talks about this often, or at least often enough for me to associate it with him. That pain is what makes us change, right? We can be stubborn. And God doesn't bring pain on us to make us change. But C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Problem of Pain, he says, God whispers to us through our pleasures. He speaks to us through our conscience. But he shouts to us in our pain. That's when his voice is the loudest. To us. That's when we can hear him the clearest. I don't know if he's actually whispering or shouting any differently, but we sure hear him a lot differently. What would it look like if we always prioritized finding God in the middle of our problems first, then getting out of that problem or getting it to stop or whatever? What if we use those tough situations, and especially the really weird ones and really paradoxical ones and the ones that were like, I don't know why this is happening to me. What if we use those as an opportunity to wrestle more intensely with who God really is, what he's like, and what he wants from me and what he wants in the world? Opportunity to see his love more clearly, an opportunity to see his care for me more clearly. What if that's what we did? What if we embraced productive pain or embrace praying to make it in a productive way when we need to. Some things are out of our control. We can't make it stop. It's what are you going to do? What's going to be your response in that moment? That's the thing you can control. It's getting quiet in here. I find myself saying this a lot too lately. I've thought about it before, but man, just some of the situations that some folks in the congregation are going through brings us to mind more often for me. Some time ago, I reached a realization in my life that, man, you guys know me. I love praying for healing, breakthrough, deliverance. I believe in it absolutely. But what means more to me in any of those situations, when it's me that's in that problem, is that God's with me. If the healing never comes, if the breakthrough never comes, if I pray my eyes out and it doesn't happen, what means more to me is that He's with me in that situation. That makes it all bearable. And it doesn't mean I give up, go, well, at least He's with me, so I'm just not going to pray for healing, right? Or pray for deliverance or pray for breakthrough. But what comes first? God, get me out of this? Or God, where are you? Many of you know that I was counting this up actually. Well, I guess during the transition between the worship and the teaching here, it's been 9 years this month. In fact, oh my gosh, yeah, 9 years today. This very day, driving home from Branson, somewhere in northwest Arkansas, when the doctor called me and said, I had an appointment. It was a Friday. I had an appointment on Monday. He said, when you come in for your appointment, we've got the results back from the biopsy. It's lymphoma. And it's serious. We need to get a port put in you, and so you might be hearing from my office this afternoon. They said, I don't want you to be surprised. And it didn't come out of the blue, but it felt like it did in that moment. But I'd been ill since late August of 2013, and it was 2015 in May when they finally said, here's what's going on. And it looked, it's a long story. If you want to hear about it later, I can tell you. But it looked like something else at first, and it just took a long time for it to finally get done. And me stamping my foot at one point to say, guys, you got to figure this out. I'm not getting better. And by the time they figured it out, it was stage 3B cancer, and man, the Lord just did a wonderful work. I hear what people go through with cancer. There's a lot of mental stuff. There's a lot of physical stuff. But, on the whole, mine was an easier case because of what the Lord did, really. Not just, don't get me wrong. It really sucked to be sick for so long. And then to finally have the diagnosis and all this stuff. But the Lord was so quick to heal me that it made it a lot different than most people's experience. But I still had to go through all the chemo and everything. What's my point? It's an example, and it's not. I don't consider it I know many of your stories that are in this room. I think we've all had tough things to walk through. This is not the worst of them. It's not even fourth or fifth to me. Because I know I maybe I'm not in your shoes, but when I look at some of the things that you guys have had to walk through with the Lord, it's not like Well, mine was way worse than anybody. It wasn't. But, man, for weeks, every day, at some point in the day, multiple times a day, I'd see myself in the mirror and I'd go, I can't believe I have freaking cancer. That was the first thought in my head, almost exactly those words. Multiple times a day, sometimes, but at least once a day for weeks. Like, I was just shocked. Nobody in my family has ever had cancer. And, but man, the Lord was there. The Lord was there. And I saw him in my church family a lot, like people just coming over and like mowing my lawn and helping me with stuff and meals. And I was remembering this one time. I don't know, this was, I think, after we'd started chemo, but before I'd had any news about how well it was working. And I just had this thought to put on some music in the house. And I put on this album by Ren Collective called Art of Celebration. It's a great album. And the atmosphere just changed. I realized, Val and I looked at each other. We were like, man, we just realized we hadn't been happy or sung or done it for I don't know how long. And it was kind of like, man, why didn't we do this sooner? But it wasn't the music that did it, guys. The music helped turn our hearts to him, to focus on him. And then when we focused on him and not on the waters we were, the fierce waters, the stormy waters we were walking through, but kept our eyes on Jesus, then we made it back to the boat. What if we, and look, I didn't do it perfectly that time, and definitely not other times, but I did have a chance to do some things that I was like, well, I'm not on the other side of my death. I'm not going to have a chance again to just sing a praise song with a raging fever. So I took that chance, because after I die, I'll never have that chance again. What if we, and to receive ministry from him, receive ministry from my church family, just feel God's love through you guys. Like, what if, God, where are you in my situation, is what we put above, God, make this stop. Why is this happening to me? And by all means, if that's what you're feeling and thinking, like, ask him. And if that's how you feel, God, is this happening to me? Say it like that if that's what you feel. Like, he's our Father, our friend. We shouldn't hide how we're feeling from him. And he'll help you, and he'll straighten you out. And depending what you say to him, you might have to hear some words back that are commensurate in tone. Just read Job and what God says to Job at the end. But, God's not afraid to talk about these things with us. He's not shocked that we're feeling horrible. He's not afraid of our emotions. Like, he's bigger than that. And he's like, cool, yeah, let's talk it out. Let's wrestle it out. I put in my text to you guys earlier this afternoon. It's also from. It's a heavy, dense book. Like, it's not light reading, but it's a good book if you want to just wrestle through some of this with C.S. Lewis, The Problem of Pain. But he makes an observation that that when we have to bear pain, a little courage helps more than a lot of knowledge. A little sympathy, human sympathy helps more than a lot of courage. And just the smallest trace of God's love helps the most of all. And that's what we're after when we're in those situations, because we live in a fallen world. Things happen. A lot of times the things that happen to us are actually our own doing, but a lot of times they're not. They're the repercussions of somebody else's mistakes, and that's the way it goes. And we may not know why, but He's there. He's with us. He knows what it's like, not just theoretically either. Like He actually experienced that, experienced loss. So, knowing that He's close to me means more to me than anything else when I'm going through something tough. And I think that that's something, keeping Him in view first will make the pain we experience, and that we're going to experience anyway, more productive and lead to a greater understanding of who He is, His purpose in our lives, His purposes in the world, how good He actually is.